Welcome, everybody, to episode 62 of the Soul and Wonder podcast, our podcast designed to inspire you to discover, align with, and unleash your true self. And today we're really excited to share space with Paul Selig, one of the foremost spiritual channels working today. And in his breakthrough works of channeled literature, I Am the Word, the Book of Love and Creation, the Book of Knowing and Worth, the Book of Mastery, and the Book of Freedom, Paul has recorded an extraordinary program for personal and planetary evolution as humankind awakens to its own divine nature. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
We're really excited to share this space with you today. Very, very inspired by especially this latest book, the Book of Freedom. So I'm excited to dive into that. But before we get into the heart of the content, you've been a medium, psychic, clairvoyant, whichever words you want to use, right, for a number of years now. And in your bio, it does mention how in 1987 you had a spiritual experience, which left you clairvoyant and was a major catalyst in your journey. What exactly happened there?
Well, I was 25. I was a year out of graduate school. I'd had a list of things that I had to have achieved in the world that I thought would make me okay. And I got the whole list and I wasn't okay. And I began out of sheer necessity looking for something more. And I heard that there was this thing happening called the harmonic convergence. And I heard people were going to be waking up. And I had just gone to this place where I thought, well, maybe there was such a thing as God, even though I'd been raised pretty much an atheist. But I'd already begun to make that leap. And I went up to the roof of this building that I was living in the night before this supposed event, and I asked to be woken up. I figured, well, if you asked why, if there was a God, why would it say no? And I'm not going to say that it enlightened me or turned me into an awakened being. I don't claim to be either of those things, but I did have an experience of energy. And, I often say, for all I know, I was just hyperventilating up there on the roof. It turns out somebody gave me a mantra and a crystal, and I had these props that I thought you needed for this big event that I believe was coming. But it turned out the mantra was a Kundalini mantra. I didn't know what Kundalini was, but people later said it sounded like a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. It was experience of energy moving up, 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 and out through the top of my head. And, and after that, I started seeing little lights around people. I don't know if it was a direct relation or not, but given where I came from, the idea that you could have a palpable experience of energy or phenomena or the divine was very important. I think for me, it was catalytic and a bit of a touchstone for me because, after something like that happens, things change, and things were changing anyway. I think going from living in a world where there's no such thing as God or a higher power or whatever you want to call it to one in which there is already like moving to another planet. So, you have to adjust to the new atmosphere. So that was 1987, and that was that experience. And, everything after that has just been, everything after that.
What a powerful dynamic. I like how you explain that contrast going from one world to the next. And you mentioned that there are some adjustments that have to be made often. What were some of those adjustments that you found yourself having to make at that time?
Well, there were a lot of adjustments that were happening at that time. I had a pedigree, kind of. I was fresh out of Yale, and I'd been writing plays and getting attention for those things early on, and had been counting on those things, and suddenly I wasn't able to count on them anymore. I had stopped drinking. I wasn't a partier anymore. I was suddenly living in this other possibility. So everything changed is the only way that I can say it. My idea of who I was, my idea of what was possible, my idea of who I was in relationship to other people, my belief in separateness and specialness, and all of those things were challenged in very radical ways. There's been nothing about my own path that's been terribly convenient. to my personality. None of it. It was mostly, somebody asked me about this recently, and I said, some people just sort of flower when they open up spiritually. And for me, it was like I threw up on everything for about 3 years. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't graceful. And it's probably still ongoing. That's just who I am. It doesn't mean that's the right way or anything other. So, that was my experience. I don't know if I've answered your question, but it continues to change. And my investment in whatever the status quo is and is supposed to be is always challenged through this, not because I think that's what I want, but because it's what happened.
Mm-hmm. So it's been somewhat of an evolutionary journey for you, and so as a clairvoyant, you have the ability to gain information through extrasensory perception, and this is something that many of our listeners are familiar with, as we've talked about these topics before, but they might not know anything about channeling, so to say. And so can you tell us what channeling is and what's the difference between a channel and being a clairvoyant?
Well, clairvoyant means clear sight. And while I do access information visually, and while my first opening was to visual phenomena, that's not really how I work in my practice. I'm primarily a clairaudient, which is clear hearing, and a clairsentient, which is clear feeling. I have this odd ability to step into other people that I've never met, and I may begin to resemble them, and I can hear them. And I do a lot of work with people to support them in sort of working through relationship issues as a result of that. When I'm channeling, I'm taking dictation, and I feel sometimes that people mistake inspiration for channeling. I think inspiration is a very real thing, but the difference is with channeling, you don't get to fix it or edit it or make it what you want it to be. So I'm a channel. It's like being a radio for another consciousness or some aspect of consciousness that seems to be able to work with my system in a broadcast. So when I'm channeling, I literally, there are different levels of being receded. I often say when I'm channeling a book, and all the books that have come through me are really the unedited transcripts of these dictation sessions with the guides. When I'm doing something like that, it's like I'm climbing into the back seat of a car, and hopefully reading a magazine and sort of not minding and trusting that whoever's got the steering wheel knows where they're going, because that's the agreement I've made. Other times it's like I'm leaning over into the front seat saying, where the hell are you going? The guides I work with sort of have to answer that, or at least tell me to be quiet for a little longer so they can finish what they're saying. But for the most part, what happens when I work is I close my eyes and I'll hear one phrase repeated incessantly again and again and again until I speak it. The moment I give voice to that phrase, everything tumbles out right behind it. It's the way it's always been. Since they began lecturing through me, and that wasn't always the case, the lecturing through me only began probably in about 2008, and I'd been doing this work for many years, but I was hearing in fragments, and I was mostly working with the energy that the guides brought through. So the initial work was all about energetic attunement. And that's still very much a part of the work, but those attunements have now been accompanied by entire books that sort of unpack the attunements and support the reader in having their own experience of the energy, so that I'm not necessary in the same way that perhaps I would be in a live situation.
Wow, that's
very well said too. Thank you for sharing that.
Probably the best description I've heard on what it truly does mean to be a channel and to channel information. You kind of cleared up some of the myths kind of floating around that realm. And you've written, what is it, 5 channel texts now in the last 8 years?
There's 6 in print, and the 7th that's coming out in August, and there's a couple more I'm told on the way. So it's been almost a book a year they've been delivering through me. But the books themselves, the first book took 14 days of sittings because I was channeling every day, and for sometimes 2 hours a day. Now they'll take a little more time. It'll be over the course of 3 months, but the dictation sessions will be over the course of, say, 20 or 30 days. The books now are being done before audiences. You know, I'm sitting in a room full of 100 people and the guides are delivering their next book, you know, live. So there's an audience that's present for the exchange, which for me is exciting because the books are living things. And, you know, before that, I was on the phone with somebody in Berkeley with the recorder on and channeling up a storm and then hanging up the phone at the end and then getting it transcribed. Now it's just an event.
And, you know, you kind of touched on a few things that I think some of our listeners might want to ask a few more questions about. They heard you refer to this source of information as guides or another point of consciousness. What, to your knowledge, who or what, to your knowledge, is this source exactly?
I mean, I call them the guides because when my ex found out that I could do this, he used to say, ask the guides this, ask the guides that. My puppy's in the background, like chewing a toy to death. So that's what that sound is.
That's okay.
Lily, come on back and see if she won't listen to me, I'm sure. Kill that thing on camera if she can. So, you know, that's why they're called the guides. The guides was a convenient name. And the guides I work with don't seem to mind it at all. So people know of my guides as the guides. The name that I've been given pretty much from the beginning has been the name Melchizedek, which is an older name. And it's a priesthood, you know, of teachers, as far as I understand it. And their job seems to be the realization of the divine in humanity. That's my definition, not theirs. They probably would correct me about how I said that. So it seems to be a collective. My experience of them has only occasionally been visual. It's primarily auditory. You know, I hear them. It's a telepathic communication. And the energy is very palpable, not just to me, but to everybody present. The energy comes and fills the room when they work and is working with people for their own support, you know. So that's the best that I can tell you. They talk about it in a couple of the books. And actually, in the book that's coming out in August, they speak to it a bit even more directly than I thought. And they begin to sort of speak to the origins of some of the religions that we know, you know, and how they're applicable and not applicable to some of what they're teaching.
And even that energy is very apparent even through just the books. Like as I'm reading through this book, I'm often overcome with just full body chills. And it's like it ignites a memory, a sort of activation, like you were talking attunements. And some people might be a little alarmed. They're like, wait a minute. So you're just letting people or consciousness flow through you it is not necessarily, you know, in the illusion of you. So they might be wondering, like, when or how did you give permission to allow this space to be shared and used for the betterment of humanity?
Well, for me, I mean, it's you know, I had studied a form of energy healing when I was in my early 30s. So I was attuned to energy and I became comfortable working with them. And when I opened up as a clairaudient, I was volunteering at a center that was open in New York City for people that were mostly, at that point, dying of AIDS. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic, and the centers were popping up. I have to shut my puppy up. Lily, come on. Come here. I may have to get up and like drag her into another room in a moment, but I prefer not to. So I'm going to see if I can stay here. So I began hearing for other people. That was the point of it. Do you understand this? My abilities always came in service to someone else. So my ability to trust what I was getting actually happened over time and through my own having the experiences of the energy sort of panned out. I sat with a group in my apartment for about 18 years doing this work before there were any books out.
Wow.
Nobody knew who I was. I was a college teacher. I was teaching at NYU. I wasn't looking for a career as a channeler. I didn't even necessarily believe in channeling when I was younger. So the fact that I would be doing this was a surprise to me. What you spoke about the books are important. The guides said in the very first book called I Am the Word, that the book was an energetic transmission that was working directly with the reader. And this is all done by permission. The guides actually, increasingly, as they take us farther and farther out in their teaching, demand permission be given for what they would like to do, because they're actually going to shift us out of some of what we believed have been the requirements of a reality that's really just a construct that we've been in collective agreement to. So the idea of sort of breaking through the false ceiling into what's beyond it does require permission, I suspect. Yes. And they're saying, yes, sorry, it's necessary. And they're basically just saying because free will is choice. You understand? So this has got to be chosen at that level to begin to move the energy. But the energy of the book seems to work with the readers who are in tune with it. They say that the books operate on two levels. There are the words in the page, which provide an intellectual construct for what's happening. And then there's the real book, which is the energetic transmission. So when the first book was published, it was interesting because the guides had said that. And there was no publicity on the first book at all. I mean, people just sort of found it and started to share it. But the reviews started coming in on Amazon. People were saying, I'm reading the book and my body's vibrating. I'm reading this book and I'm seeing auras. And so there's always been phenomena attached to this work. And what I like about that is that it actually gives the reader or the student of the work the availability to their own knowledge and experience. It's not about deference to some intellectual idea. It's experiential, and it needs to be experiential in order to be, I believe, trusted and known and worked with effectively.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I know, reading texts throughout the years, different spiritual texts, there's been few that have felt so just right, I guess, authentic. And reading this as well, feeling those attunements while they happen is pretty special, and is pretty rare, as I've read so many books in the past. But so your latest book, The Book of Freedom, what is the premise of these teachings? If you can give kind of an overview to the listener.
Good luck.
I'll try, because there's now so many of them. But they're sequential, and there's a build of the teaching, and people can enter at any time, I believe, because the guides have said more than once that they're teaching in a one-room schoolhouse, which means everybody's welcome in the classroom, and they'll be met at the level that they can attend to the teachings with. I mean, that's the individual instruction or ability to comprehend that seems to happen. In the very first book, I Am the Word, they said something in the first day or two of dictation, before I even really trusted that there was a book. They said they'd had a book to write, and I didn't believe it, but I showed up for it anyway, for the spoken. And it's all spoken dictation that's been recorded and transcribed. They said they used the term Christ to mean Christ being the aspect of the Creator that can be realized in material form. As who and what you are, which is what I now understand it to mean. They say that Christ in humanity is an event that happens. And what they've been teaching, in my understanding, is the realization of the divine in form, the truth of who we are in expression, in form and field. And as the teachings progress, this is really where they're going. In the Book of Freedom, they're really beginning to invite us to have an experience of the divine as manifest, and in a kind of energetic coherence. There was one chapter that was dictated, or I don't know if it was one chapter, a big chunk of the book, maybe 70 pages of the book, was conducted during a workshop or two at the Esalen Institute. I was there for a week doing 2 workshops, and they took the opportunity to dictate every day. And they started teaching to the claim, I know what I am, which means, form. I know what I am as the divine in form. And the response that you may have when you claim that and then claim the divine in what you see. They say everything that you can see is of God because it's all made of the same stuff. It's just vibrating at different levels. And the realization or knowing of the divine in what you see will call back to you an echo or an experience of it. And it's really quite something. They do it in my workshops all the time now. But the first day that they did it, they just put everybody out on the lawn who was in the workshop and had them claim the divine from 20 feet away and the one that they see. And we'd all feel these waves of energy come back at us. And what they said is, well, what you bless blesses you back, or the divine in form will call back to you its vibrational expression. And they're saying that's how the world is lifted. That's how a new world is known, is through the realization of what's always been true, not sort of the masquerade that we've been engaging in here, which is not doing us terribly well all the time, it seems.
Wow. And that is true freedom. Absolutely. The definition of freedom is all in this book. And it was something that, you can feel a calling to, even when you aren't quite sure, that you feel a calling to remembering this freedom. And this book surely came into our lives at the perfect timing. So for that, I'm grateful. And, the book does talk a lot about stepping away from the boxes that our small self may in fact put us in, and learning how, not even really learning, but remembering how to embody the true self, the divine self, which you were talking about. What is the difference between the small self and the true self?
Well, as I understand it, the personality self is a structure, and it's sort of a composite of information. It's how we were treated by our parents, and what race we're born into, or religion, or decayed. All of these things. It's sort of the applied experience of personality, I suppose, is one way to look at it. It's an idea of who we are based on, in many ways, prescription. This is what it means to be a man, or this is what it means to be a man my age, or this is what it means to be, and just pick something. Do you understand this? Where we have all these mirrors. This is what beauty means. This is what success means. All of those things. So the small self, they say, knows itself through historical data. That's how it knows itself. And because we're always expecting to get what we've had, we're always, they say, dining out on yesterday's leftovers. We expect to get what we have. I expect to be treated the way my mother treated me, or my father treated me, or what my last boss said I was good at or bad at. That's what I call forth. That's how we operate. The true self actually operates outside of time, they say. It's the eternal self. It can know itself in time, but that's in the moment you stand in. The true self doesn't operate in fear, doesn't look to others to be affirmed for their worth or their lack of worth, if that's the issue. The true self knows. The small self thinks, and the true self knows. So the alignment to the true self and the expression of the true self is what they speak to. I heard recently that somebody that I like, a friend of mine, has decided that there is no real difference between the true self and what the guides call, the personality structure. And I actually can't go there because, my idea of who I am at a level of personality is all pretty much been conscripted for me, by my upbringing and my culture and my world. And I think I know that I'm infinitely more than that. But if I want to play by the rules of society and get what I think I'm supposed to get, which is the small self, my small self thinks I should be doing this, this, and that, and that you should say this, this, and that about what I do, because it confirms an idea. I can play that game. If I go beyond that, I begin to have a very different experience, not only of me, but of you as well. It's easiest for me when I'm channeling and when I'm teaching, when the guides are coming through me, because they don't hold judgment and they're not frightened. So I can look at somebody when I'm operating at that level and see the breathtaking beauty of who they are beyond what they may have ever conceived of themselves as. And at the same time, understand where they perceive themselves to be in lack or in shame or in, fear. And then you can move it by realizing the higher. You can lift them by the realization of the higher. You never lift anything by confirming the old, by confirming, the idea of fear, shame, or worth. Like, you'll be okay as long as it's like, you'll be fine when you marry the right man, or you'll be fine when you get that promotion, as if it's going to be affirmed. one's value. And you can't affirm value in that way, because if value is affirmed that way, value is bullshit. You know what I mean? It's dependent on whether you get the promotion or whether you get the right spouse or get into the right school. And it's unfortunate that we all buy into this stuff so much. I know I did in some ways, but I was never very good at succeeding at it, which is perhaps why I'm now doing this odd work. You know, it doesn't matter to me that much anymore after many, many years teaching college, that this is my life. Nobody could have told me this 10 years ago, and I don't think I would have believed it, but it is.
Wow. And questioning those agreements, you know,
Yes.
those old stories, the boxes, it's so just even questioning it. I think they give an exercise in this book where they're like, whenever you have time, just write down all the things you could possibly ever believe to be true about your life in the world. And then ask yourself, why do I believe this? And it's not doubting what it is. It's just giving you the power to move into a space where you can cleanse if it's no longer serving of what we might call the true or divine self, and gives you the opportunity, whether you continue to make the agreement or not, which I love. They come from this zero judgment point. They're like, hey, if you want to make those agreements, by all means, make the agreements. That is your choice. But you do have the freedom to make new agreements, thus opening such a wider spectrum of possibility for what can be manifest in your life.
It's very well said. You know, what they say in the books are, you know, nothing can be claimed until it's first claimed as a possibility, you know, and we often don't, because we don't think we're allowed to, or we've been told we shouldn't, or we don't want to be disappointed, or whatever the rationale is. But if we don't do that, we tend to get what we've always gotten. You know, until there's the potential for change and we accept our accountability to that, we more than likely won't go into agreement to it. And agreement, they say, is co-resonance. What they say, what you're seeing in your life, like it or not, high and low and in between, is what you're in resonance with. That's your vibrational accord, individually and as they're getting to, in the Book of Freedom, collectively, what we all have agreed to, what we were all told to believe, that we can now move beyond if we're willing to.
Absolutely.
And I also like how you mentioned in the book about our emotional responses and how these emotional responses play out in everyday life, and that we can then become more so the observer of our emotional responses to whatever is happening, you know, to us at that moment, or what other people are saying. So I really appreciate you mentioning that as well. I think it's really important for us to take a step back and to see our emotions from above. And of course, that's not always easy to do in the heat of the moment, but the more practice, the better, for sure.
I agree. I mean, I'm not all that great at it, but I'm much, much better at the understanding that everything is an opportunity to learn. And that's why there really aren't wrong choices, you know. I mean, my guides have said, well, if you want to all learn by killing each other, you know, and warring, you can choose to do that. It's not the highest choice you can make, and they're certainly offering another option to that. But if you look at the world, you know, that seems to be how we've invested, you know, and the guides say, you know, we've been at war for so long, we just expect it to be there, and consequently, we're going to keep creating it, and we have to move to a consciousness where that's not there, a level of consciousness where war makes no sense, in order for that to be so. You know, I agree with what you're saying.
Absolutely.
So you shared some basically you've distinguished between the small self and the true self for us. But what tips do you have for our listeners to begin distinguishing between the two? If you haven't shared something already, maybe something else, but also for raising their vibration to align with more of a coherent expression of their true divine self.
Well, I mean, I'll share a few things first that the guides always teach, which may be just sort of helpful as sort of tips or sort of points of instruction that can be returned to. The guides say again and again that the action of fear is to claim more fear. And they say, look at every choice you've made in fear and see what it got you, which is more than likely more of the same. So don't make choices based in fear. Now, this isn't about not being prudent. When I live in Manhattan, it's not a bad idea to have a lock on your door. But if I had 10 locks on my door, that would probably be indicative of something else. There's a difference between sort of asking who's at the door when the doorbell rings, you're not expecting anybody, and just opening the door to whatever. You can sort of use common sense. But the action of fear, to my mind, when I look back on my life, has always gotten me more and more and more of the same. And, I've lived a fearful life in many ways, and all of the instruction I'm getting now is about how not to do that. So that's one thing they say. They say, you can't be the light and hold another in darkness. So it's a real simple teaching, but they say it's the hypocrisy of most religions, which is I'm holy and you're not. And the guides say, well, everything is holy and everyone is holy. And to decide that the divine isn't present in the one that you can't stand is really to deny the divine in yourself and everything else at the same time. And they say what you put in darkness calls you right to it. Mm-hmm. So, and what you judge, you fear. So there's an opportunity there to find out, again, how you're acting in fear. The guides work with attunements, and they say the attunements are language that have been encoded with vibration that will support people in the realization of them, of the meaning of the attunement. And, I can share, they're doing the second one, I can share one with you, which is the one in Book of Freedom. And, it's a simple thing, and I'll explain it. They're saying after. So you can repeat this after me, and then your listeners can as well, and I'll then explain it. So I know who I am in truth.
I know who I am in truth.
I know what I am in truth.
I know what I am in truth.
I know how I serve in truth.
I know how I serve in truth.
I am free, I am free, I am free.
I am free, I am free, I am free.
Now I can feel you over here, so you're like going like right up like that. So that's an attunement. I don't know if you could feel it, but it's nice. So the claim, I know who I am, isn't spoken by the personality self. It's the true self who knows who he or she is. So my personality self is like, it's Paul, I wish I had a partner, I really want to get out of New York, I wish my dog would stop peeing on the floor. I mean, that's all okay stuff, but it's not the eternal self, who knows who he is, who's not defined through these things. I know who I am. I know what I am means in form and manifestation, I know what I am in truth, which means the body and the experience of form. I know what I am in truth. I know how I serve in truth, they say, is how one is most fully expressed. To be in service is to be expressed in the highest way. I know who I am, or who the divine self is in expression, is how you serve. It's not necessarily your job or, your career or what you think it should be. It really is how you be, and how that unfolds, and what that then calls to you in vibrational accord. And the claim, I am free, I am free, I am free, is again spoken by the aspect of self that knows he or she is free, that knows that's true, which isn't the self that believes that his sense of well-being is dependent on his employment or the status of the relationship or any of the other things that we weight with all that energy of security. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. So they say that the claim itself is the attunement and the spoken or the intent of the words. They can be done silently. The attunements will support you in basically tuning the radio that you are to play the higher broadcast they say is always present. And we're all radios, they say, but these are some stations that are here that we haven't known that we can play. So they're just giving us those coordinates in resonance so that we can meet them, and then through the spoken attunement sort of align to the meaning. And that in and of itself can and will change things. They say in truth, I know who I am in truth. The book before the Book of Freedom is called the Book of Truth, and they say in that book, in truth a lie cannot be held. In the vibration of truth, a lie can't be held. So when you claim that, you're sort of supporting yourself and not moving into self-deception around these things. And also you're aligning to, again, what they would say is always true. People sometimes say, my truth is, and the guides have been known to say, well, that's not your truth, that's your opinion. There's nothing wrong with having your opinion, but what is true is always true.
Mm.
That's so powerful. And it truly is an attunement, not so much empty words that, we have to find a meaning for. Like, I find myself just for some reason repeating it in my head after reading it through this book, and it just resonated so vibrantly in my being that, like, sometimes I find myself just on this loop mantra. And my best advice to people listening is you better be ready for things to fall away that are not in alignment with that claim, and trust in yourself as the divine being that you are, as you bring the rest of your external reality into alignment with that internal knowing. And it's so, so beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with our listeners.
Thank you.
And so, undoubtedly, like, our consciousness is shifting dramatically on so many levels. And so what do you believe is in store for humanity in the coming decade?
I don't know, and I'm not a fortune teller. I'm a psychic, but I don't like to do that work. I mean, I know what the guides have said and continue to teach, and they're teaching all the time. Every Wednesday, they're live streaming. I do workshops all the time, and there's all these books. So the information just keeps pouring out. They don't speak to current events. It's very, very rare. I don't think they've ever spoken directly, but they've responded to things that we're all looking at well. And, 2 or 3 days, I think it was, before the last presidential election, I was channeling in Richmond, Virginia, and they gave a lecture, and that one's actually up on YouTube. It was called Great Change. And they said, you're used to choice being, I'll have the milk and not the cream in my coffee. And they say what you're about to get is what happens when the table holding the milk and the cream gets turned over. It's not what you've expected and not what you will know. And you don't have a frame of reference for it. Or maybe that I added that in the frame of reference. I don't remember exactly what they said. It's in the lecture. The milk and the cream, that was for them. And it was surprising at the time because it's not what I expected to happen at all. They've spoken again and again that humanity is at a time of reckoning, and they say a reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations. And everything that's been created in fear needs to be reknown, reconceived. And that includes many of the structures that we become very reliant upon. That includes government and religion and all these things. Anything that's got its basis in fear, they say, is quaking. And the Book of Truth, and this was really interesting because it came before a time when people were sort of disclosing all kinds of things. They said that what was about to happen was that the backyard was about to be excavated, and everything that's been buried in the backyard gets to come up. The things that were buried last week and the things that were buried 10,000 years ago. And if you look at a backyard under excavation, it doesn't look very pretty. It's a bit of a mess. But the opportunity is for everything to be brought to the light, to be healed or to be reknown in some way. And what we keep sort of dragging around with us doesn't get healed. I think somewhere in the newest book, they talk about wanting to go, what they call this place, they're teaching now in this place they call the upper room, which they say is a higher octave. At the very end of the Book of Freedom, they invite everybody over a threshold. And in the next book, we're right there over the threshold at the top, and everything is being taught at that level. But they say, you want to grab your pot of pain and bring it with you to this higher level and sit on it and protect it. And that doesn't really get to happen. We have choices here. So, I feel that where we're going has enormous potential. Do I think it's going to be graceful? No, I don't. Because I think we're very intent on protecting the known and who we believe ourselves to be. And that's true at the level of culture and country as much as anything else. The guides recently said, in another interview recently, somebody asked about the president and his meaning, and the guides didn't speak to the president, but they did speak to the meaning. And they said, well, what you're seeing now, and again, I'm paraphrasing and I may get it wrong, is you're starting to see who you've always been as a country in some ways. The idea of being a dominator, and the idea, and this is basically what's being uncovered. And they said, what you're looking at right now is what happens when the bedspread gets pulled off the bed and you get to see the bugs that have been there. It's again, it's an opportunity. What you're seeing, what's been present. I mean, to say that we have not been a racist culture would be to lie. We have been. It's been endemic, and every other thing that you can imagine. And there's wonderful things about us too. And I don't speak to politics, and they don't either. But I do speak to what I perceive as their message of change.
Wow. Well, it's exciting. It's, I think, nerve-wracking for some. I think we just kind of have to go with the ride. You bought the ticket, take the ride, go with the flow.
Well said.
So where can our listeners follow you? I know, obviously, you might have multiple websites or just one, but where can they follow you?
My website's paulselig.com. It's paulselig.com. And it's got everything up there. It's a calendar of events. I'm doing workshops all over the place. So I'm often in somebody's backyard. I'm often in Boston. I'm all over. And I live stream on Wednesday nights, and that information's up there too. And there's information on the books as well, though they can be purchased online at all the major retailers or in your local bookstore.
Wonderful.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciated everything, and look forward to speaking again soon and hopefully seeing you here in Boston.
Would love it. Thank you for having me. Be well.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.